Hello and welcome to a new video in which I will explain to you how you can create a page on Wikidata for a historic building. I hinted at that in the last video about earth mortar, and I used Maddoxtown Church in that video, and this is where I am starting off again with the same Wikidata page for Maddoxtown Church ruin, just to explain a little bit how Wikidata works. So this is called an item, this page basically, or the Maddoxtown Church ruin in this case is called an item, and each item has an identifier number which starts with a Q. And then it has a description which is displayed right underneath, and then it has alternative names which are displayed underneath that again. And then you start with the data sheet. It might, when you open it, it might not show all the languages, and it will also show way fewer languages than what it shows to me. I won't go into how you can display all of those, okay? So usually if you live in Ireland or in the UK, you will probably fill in the English one. You can also, of course, fill in the Irish, Welsh, or Scottish one, which I don't have the Scottish one displayed here because I've never used it, but the odd time I use some of the other ones, and sometimes I add the German description, for example. I won't do that now because I don't want to get too distracted. I might do it with the new example. So this is kind of, I don't know if that has a name, I would call it maybe the language box, where you have, in the first column, you have the languages that you have displayed, and then the label, which is kind of the name. But because some items are not physical objects, maybe they thought that name was not a good term to use, and then the description, and then also the alternative names, which is headed with also known as. I don't know what it says in the other languages, because it depends on your browser settings, whatever language is used in your browser. And then there's a link with all other languages. So someone has, for some reason, added an Arabic name for, or a definition for, Maddoxtown Church ruin. And because I don't have that in my settings, Arabic, it's not shown to me, but you can display it using the link all entered languages. And then we start with the statements, and the statements are what describes the item in more detail. So you have a name and a description basically, and alternative names, but that does not really give you an awful lot of information. And this is where Wikidata comes in really strong and useful. So the first thing you should always do is define the instance of, or sometimes it could be a subclass as well, but instance of is more commonly used. At least I use it much more commonly. And this is a church ruin, so the instance of is, and there are two alternatives that I'm aware of, either church building, because that's what it was built as, a church building, and then you can add a state of conservation, which is ruinous, because it is a church ruin. But you could also add the instance of church ruin, like that, okay? And that, again, each one of these is its own item. So if I click on church building and open that in a new tab, it will open the item page for church building, where it says the name or the label is church building, and then a definition or description, and also alternative names. So a church building is something that is built for Christian worship. You could have a community hall that is turned into a building, or you could have some sort of like some retail space that is turned into a church, but it's not built as a church. So there is a difference between a church building and something that is used as a church. And then you have all kinds of, all the other languages, obviously, because it is much more commonly used. There's going to be a lot more languages here. And the reason why every one of these things is an item is because it is linked open data. So everything is linked, and if you don't know, this is not a good example because most people will know what a church building is, but if you had some tool that is only used by very few craftsmen, for example, and you would have the name of that tool, a description of maybe what it does. It might just say tool used by a blacksmith or something, or some trait that is not very common anymore, maybe. Or it could be something super modern as well. And then you might not know what a blacksmith is. Bad example, because most people do. But it's all linked, so you could click on blacksmith and it would explain to you what a blacksmith is, and so on and so forth. It can be quite a rabbit hole, but most of the times it probably isn't. And the instance of is quite often used for the queries that I showed in the last video as well, where I searched for all the buildings that they are defined as a building. So because, and I mentioned that in the last video as well, a church building is a type of a building. So when you click on this, at some point in the item for church building, it will say that it is a subclass of a building. Whereas you could have worship in other religions that don't require a building, for example. So it used, in the search, it used subclass of building and made of material earth mortar in the last video. Okay, so that's very basic information that you kind of need for every item you define. Otherwise, you don't really, apart from the description, which is not as machine readable, you won't know what it is. So you can have one instance, or you could have more of them. Some church buildings might be reused as a residence now. So you might have church building without the state of conservation ruinous. It might be a building that was intended as a church, but it is now used as a residence, and then you would add instance of, I think it's dwelling. Yeah. So the first word you see in the suggestions is the label, and in brackets it'll show whatever is put in under also known as in your chosen browser language, and then underneath it will have the definition. So it's quite important to add a definition as well. Not everybody might know what you're talking about, because you never know who's going to look up this information. So you have to be accessible and put in as much information as you can to make it easier for people to use. It's a lot of work on your part, but you make someone else's life easier, and they might make your life easier in some other way. You know, we should be all a community. The next statement then is an image, and that is an image from Wikimedia. And you can have, for a church, you can have an image of the exterior, which is usually it just uses image, I think. But you could also have an image of the interior, which is a different statement. Then you have the geographical location. So you start with the country and then located in the administrative territorial entity, which you can put in Ireland. You can put in the townland, and that is enough, which is sometimes very difficult if it is a very common townland, like Newtown or something, to find the right one, and you want to find the right one to provide good information. You could also add what I usually do. Well, I usually just put in the county, but for certain topics, I have put in the townland, and then I've added maybe the barony and the civil parish and the county. But because the townland Wikidata item is usually defined as being in a certain civil parish and county, you don't have to do that. But you might want to be thorough. And then you have the coordinate location, which you can get from OpenStreetMap or from anywhere else, really. And in this case, I got it from the historic environment viewer, and you link that. For the previous ones, I don't think you really need a source. But for some of them, like this, for example, it's important, in my opinion, to give the source. I try to use OpenStreetMap instead of the HEV, but sometimes I still use the HEV. And then, in this case, I have the made from material statement, which I won't go into now. I've started making 3D models of some of the buildings using photogrammetry, and then I upload the models to Sketchfab, and there is an option to link that as well, even though Sketchfab is technically not open data, not as open as other things. And you can link that using the statement external data available at URL, for example. And then you add the full link to the Sketchfab page for that model. There is also an option to create a short link on Sketchfab, but don't use that, use the full link. And I don't have it here, but for example, if you have, I don't know, if someone did a very thorough video about a historic building and it's on YouTube, you can also link to the YouTube ID, for example, which I don't have for this, so I can't show you how to do that. But you use the YouTube ID is the weird, number, alphanumeric number at the end of the link, and you use just that one, not the full link. And for some of the links and sources, you might also want to use, oh yeah, I forgot to say that up here. So this is called a qualifier, the state of conservation, or it could be state of use, or all kinds of different things are qualifiers. And again, they all have their own Wikidata item because it is all linked open data. Why was I saying this? I forgot already. Oh yeah, some of the links or sources that you give, it will ask you to add the language of the work. So if you quote a history book about that historic building or any sort of a book, it will ask you to enter the language of, I could add that here. So if you go into, you have to be logged in, you have to have a Wikidata account, ideally. I think some things they let you do without an account and some things you don't, but it's all about accountability as well and transparency, so they can, if you made a mistake or someone has a question, they can contact you. So you go onto edit and then you add qualifier, and it already asks me language of work or name, and then you type in whatever language it is, and my descriptions on Sketchfab are usually always in English, so that's what I type in. And then you will just hit publish. So that's the external data. And then for some of the buildings, especially in County Kilkenny, I have, through all the various little projects and rabbit holes I've worked on, I have added where you can find information about them, and it's more thorough for some sites and less thorough for others. But you have a statement called described by source. And usually for the historic buildings, they will be on the historic environment viewer. So you can almost add that to anything, but do check if it's on it. And then because I was working on a down survey project, it is also displayed on the down survey, this 1655-ish map series. So I've added that. And you can see that location is a qualifier and subject named as is a qualifier. So because the down survey depicted castles and churches, and sometimes they were already in ruins in 1655, like this church, it is labeled as the walls of a church rather than saying Maddoxtown Church or, I don't know, St. Mary's Church, Maddoxtown. So that's what I put in there because I needed that for my project. It is very thorough and very aimed at what I've used it for projects for, but you don't have to do all the details. But then a very important one also is the commons category. So if you have, of your historic buildings, if you have more than 2 images on Wikimedia, you can create a category for it and you can link this category there. I'll just open that. When you create that category, you can also link to the historic environment viewer using this template here. I won't go into that. And then you can use another template to add this nice info box here. And all the information in the info box comes from here. So you have the same image as you can see there. That's the same image. You can add, and sometimes the Wikimedia app does that, add more than one image here. And then I think it usually displays only the first one, but there's also a way to mark one as the preferred image. And then, because we're in the category, there's an upload media button. So if you click that, the images or the media that you upload will go automatically into this category. So that saves a bit of admin time once this is all set up. And then you have all the information here in a nice, info box layout. And more links here. So that was the category. If you're wondering what this little symbol is, it's a plugin that I think it's a plugin that you can activate in your Wikidata account, and it lets you rearrange the entries. Because when I was adding all the sources, I kind of wanted them in chronological order, but they just appear in the order you put them into the database. This is not a good example because I only have 2 entries for described by source. But for some of them, especially when I looked them up in the Ormond deeds, some of the townland names, for example, will turn up very often, especially when important people live there, or when the boundaries were very controversial or something, and it just turns up in the paperwork a lot. And the Ormond deeds are in 6 volumes, and I just put them in however I found them, but I didn't like that. I wanted it in chronological order, so you can use this here and move them up and down. And then we have the identifiers, which usually for historic buildings is either the historic sites and monuments record or depending on the time, the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, so the NIAH number, and then you should always link to that. And I do hope that when they relaunch the Historic Environment Viewer that those links will still work, because otherwise we're kind of screwed. And then sometimes I also add the OpenStreetMap way ID, or sometimes it's a relation or a node, depending on the structure. And then there are also other links which have not been filled in. There's no Wikipedia page that I'm aware of Maddoxtown Church, and so on. So there could be a lot more linked open data, but there isn't. It's not the most written about church ruin. Okay, so I'm going to show you now how you can create one of these. And I will use a castle in County Waterford that I'm going to visit very soon. And it will save me a lot of hassle when I'm uploading images and so on afterwards. So I've mentioned the Wikimedia app already. It's an app you can download. Is it called Wikimedia app? Probably something like that. And if you have that, you can, it's called Commons because it's Wikimedia Commons. You can upload images, and because we have defined the location here, maybe you've already experienced this and you don't know why it works that way. It took me a while to figure out. If the building that you have photographed has its own Wikidata page with coordinates, and you upload an image that you've taken near that location, obviously you have to have location activated on your phone, on your camera, or the image has to have the GPS coordinates in the EXIF data, then it will ask you, is this a photograph of such and such a building? And if there are a lot of buildings around you that are on Wikidata, it might suggest the wrong one. But if it's, if it's a castle in the middle of nowhere, it might suggest the right one. And then you just click yes, and it fills in the name and the description automatically. Well, you can still change it, but it'll automatically do that. And in the process of uploading, it will put them in the right Wikimedia category. And that is a bit of a problem, it will likely also add an image here. And that's how sometimes I tend to take a lot of detailed pictures of windows and doorways and even smaller things. It might end up putting images in here that might be a little bit too detailed to end up here. That is a little bit of a problem, but it's better than having too much information than too little. Okay, so that's how all of that works. So the castle that I'm hopefully going to see soon is here, Temple Michael Castle. It's just about in Waterford at the border to County Cork. So before you cross the fairly long bridge, the Yall Bridge. No, sorry, after you cross the long bridge, there's a right turn, and that brings you to this site that I have never been to. So the townland is named Temple Michael, so you already know there has to be a church there, or there was at some point, and it is dedicated to the Archangel Michael. So there is a St. Michael's well there, apparently a Temple Michael church, which is probably, I haven't read up on it, but it is modern, so it's probably a board of first fruits, replacing, unfortunately, a medieval church. But there's also a castle ruin there. And I want to create a Wikidata entry for this castle. So it's called Temple Michael Castle here. Makes sense. There might be an alternative name after the family who owned it. is it the Desmonds or something? I can't remember. So first you have to check that there isn't already a Wikidata entry for it. And one way of doing that is Michael Castle. So it says no match found. I'll just click on that just in case find something similar. No. So that is one way of doing it, but just in case somebody only used the name of the family, for example, I usually also put in the SMR number or NIH number, so which you find using the Historic Environment Viewer. This might be the last time, hopefully, that I have to use the interim version. Temple Michael. There's probably more than one. There's one in Tipperary. Maybe it knows the castle. No. Temple Michael Waterford. So here we are. There's quite a few things. As you can see, the Holy Well. The church has a blue dot because it is a rebuilt modern church, and a red dot because there used to be a medieval church. I don't know what this one is. A mausoleum. And there we have the tower house, and then there's two more. There's a barn there, and another building that had something to do with the castle, or was it the presbytery or something? I can't remember. Anyways, here's the castle, and here is the SMR number. I do recommend using the whole number. Some of them might end in 4 hyphens, but use the whole thing, the whole alphanumeric key. Copy that and find your Wikidata tab again. Paste that and search for that. And it also doesn't find that. So it does seem like there is no entry for it yet. So if I went, you could go back, because when I was looking for Temple Michael Castle, it said there were no results matching the query. You may create a new item, and the create a new item is a link. So if you click on that, it will automatically create a new item with that name in it, or with that label. So you add a description. So it's a tower house ruin in Michael County, Waterford. I guess I could put in Temple Michael Tower House, for example. If you have a church ruin, you might want to just put in church, and then in the alias church ruin, townland name or whatever. Church and townland name, church ruin, or the other way around. I think archaeologists and historians tend to call things church even though it is a ruin. I don't know, maybe that's not just limited to archaeologists. And then you hit the create item, and it starts off with an almost empty data sheet, so to speak, but you have the label there, the queue number, which is by now fairly long because that's how many items have been created, the definition, and the alias. So we will start with the statements. And when you click on add statements, it usually already suggests that you start with the instance of. So it's kind of guiding you through the process. So in this case, it's instance of, it's a tower house, and there are two, might have to spell that in 2 words. So there's 2 options that might apply to a tower house in Ireland. The first one is a type of stone structure built for defensive and habitation purposes. You can choose that one. And the other one is tower house type of castles in Britain and Ireland. For County Kilkenny, I've used the second one. But as I said, you could use both. And then you can see there's movies called Tower House and whatever other buildings also called Tower House, but we don't want that. We just want to define what it is. So I'll choose that one. I might just use the other one as well, just to be safe, because I don't know, someone might, for their query, they might use this one. So this, of course, looks the same, but if you hover over it or if you click on the link, you'll see that they have different ID numbers. So the second one is older because it's only a 5-digit number, and this one is a 7-digit number. Okay, so that's defines it as a tower house. That's a good start. Yeah, we could also add the qualifier state of conservation. Ruinous. There's also something could also just be demolished or destroyed, which it isn't yet. It's only ruinous. Just, giving you some options there. I guess I should be fair and add it here as well. So that's the instance of taken care of. And then usually when you add the next statement for this type of buildings, if you were defining, I don't know, a chess move or something, it will ask different things after this. So if I click on add statement, the next thing it will very likely ask is the country, or maybe the coordinate location. I'll go with country first, so it's Ireland, which of course has its own Wikidata entry. And then the next statement, I usually skip the coordinate location for a little while. I go to located in the administrative territorial entity. And if I type in Temple Michael, we'll see what happens. So there's an electoral district in County Waterford. I don't know if it is in that one. You can always open them and check the location. Hopefully they have coordinates. Yeah, that seems to be the right one. So I could go with that one. I've lost it now. The civil parish in County Waterford is what I was looking for, which I've lost now here. So I define that to be in that civil parish, and then I could add County Waterford. I don't have to, but I like to have the county there. And if I refresh the page, the little icon for changing the order appears. I would go from smallest administrative unit to largest, I guess. So I'm just going to leave it like that. Since it keeps asking about the coordinate location, I will give it a coordinate location. And it is here, as you can see. You try to find the center on OpenStreetMap, right click, show address, and then in the little search box you can copy the coordinates. Make sure if there's any minuses and something like that, you don't forget about those. And then you can paste that in here and it'll automatically display the map. And you can add the reference. And for OpenStreetMap, I usually use stated in and then OpenStreetMap. If I had used the historic environment viewer, if you want the coordinates for that, click on your historic building, and then now it's at the bottom right. I don't know if it's going to be like that when they relaunch it in April, but you just look for the 3 little dots. I presume they're going to use that because that's the international convention to indicate a menu. And you click on that, left click, and then view attribute table. And you have to make sure your subject is still on screen. Sometimes it might be covered up by this just opened attribute table, so you have to make sure it's on screen, and then make sure you have the right one. So we have Castle Tower House, blah blah blah, and there is the link here under website link, and you can just right click and copy the link and paste that in here instead. But you would use not stated in but reference URL. Okay. And then we can publish that. So we have some really basic information here now. The instance of the location, and that's it basically. you could have an image, and luckily there's one photograph of it on Wikimedia already. It's not the best, but it is in the image, and you just copy the name of the file after the file colon and paste that here. Usually there's a little drop down thing to confirm that that image is meant, and you can just click on that and publish. Because there's only that one image, it doesn't have its own Wikimedia category, but if I get to go there and I get to take some pictures, I will create one, and then I can link that as well. Oh yeah, the OpenStreetMap way ID. So I have this on screen, and on the right hand side I have a menu, and there's layers there, and fairly far down you have a box that you can take map data, and that will highlight everywhere where there is data. And you can just click on the blue line around the castle or whatever your building is and make sure it has the name that you were looking for. And you copy this here. This is the way ID, this number. Go back to your Wikidata and you can add that here as OpenStreetMap way ID. I should have copied where was I? Didn't copy that. So that's the way ID. Paste that there. And you can see that's immediately also a link. So if I click on this now, it'll open that that way on OpenStreetMap. And this is because it is linked data, and not just linked data, but linked open data. If you come back in a couple of weeks' time, there might be a Google, is it called a Google Knowledge Graph or something like that? So they probably have, I don't know how it works. I presume they have bots that run over this, and it will add that automatically, because it does have, I have checked it out on Google because I had to send a link to a friend who still hasn't made the switch away from Google, and it does have a little marker with the name of the castle on it. So they have it in their knowledge database, however it works, and there might be a bot running across and checking once in a while, and they might add that. So we will have, did I not put in the SMR number? So I will do that. So there will be more identifiers there. And Google isn't the only one. There's other platforms that will link to that. So you can already see here the other suggestion it has, for example, Commons category, which I said I can't do. Canmore ID is for the Scottish heritage database. And then we have Historic Environment Scotland ID and British listed buildings. I don't know why it doesn't, for example, suggest Cadw, which is the Welsh one. And I honestly don't know why they even suggest the Scottish and the British one, but they do, and they don't suggest the Irish one, even though we have told it this building is in Ireland. So what I want to add is the Sites and Monuments record number, so you can just type in SMR, because as their alias it has SMR ID, which is what we want. And we'll go back to the Historic Environment Viewer and copy that and paste it there. And in the reference, just as I explained earlier, we use the reference URL, which we get from here, and paste that. And refresh. Go to 100% on the page, and that's what that looks like now. So if I go and take pictures with my phone, which I hopefully won't, I'll probably take pictures with my regular camera. But if you took pictures with your phone of a historic building and tried to upload it with the Commons app, the Wikimedia Commons app, it should now suggest, is this Temple Michael Castle? And then you can say yes, and it'll do a lot of the work for you. Well, I will have done the work for you, but you're welcome. So that is probably quite a long video, and it might be a little bit overwhelming if you've never done this, but once you've done it a couple of times, it gets easier. And there's certain things Like, I don't know a lot about County Waterford and their historic, like the history books. Like, we in Kilkenny we have Canon Carrigan, who's considered quite an authority on antiquities. So usually you can put him under described by source. I don't know what the source is for Waterford, but we could add the HEV, I suppose. Described by source, historic environment viewer. Although sometimes I feel like when there's no description here, which happens plenty of times, you know how when you open this and it says the Archaeological Survey of Ireland is in the process of blah 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 blah. I sometimes tend to not add described by source then, because it isn't really described there. You know, up to you. There's a lot of decisions you can make at your discretion, and maybe somebody will think that what I'm doing is all crap. Maybe, who knows? I'm hoping it's not. I'm trying to be helpful. There's nothing in it for me apart from, you know, taking some work off me whenever I go to this castle and upload the images. But it's just something meaningful to do, and I'm not expecting anyone to do the historic buildings of a whole county or something. It's just something you can do. And also, when Wiki Loves Monuments is on again, which is usually in September, it's an annual competition. I want to say photo competition, but you can upload other things as well, as long as it is media. It helps them to add these sites to their database of, they create a little map and you can check and see, oh, there's not a single image of this site yet, so I better go and visit it and take a picture. So mine's gonna be the first one, you know. There's a little bit of excitement in that. Or if there's a really old, you know, if some German went around, as they usually do, in the 1990s and took pictures, and it's quite outdated with all the erosion that happened since, it might be useful to have a more up-to-date photograph of that site. And if you're in a historical society in Ireland, you might discover your photograph in someone else's PowerPoint presentation. I think that is quite satisfying. That has happened to me and is increasingly happening to me because I have uploaded so many photographs to Wikimedia. Someone might ask themselves or me why I'm going through all this trouble when there's all that information on the historic environment viewer. First of all, not all the information is on the historic environment viewer. There is still plenty of sites that don't have any description, so it's not helpful apart from letting you know where the site is, and not even access or anything. Let's not go into that. But also, Wikidata, because it is open data and linked open data, it's way more democratic, and it's not in the control of your government. Admittedly, if you add some of the information from the historic environment viewer, that part is still in the control of the government, but not everything. And since a lot of these descriptions, and they might fix that, hopefully not this one, with the new release, they had photographs of the sites, but whenever that system crashed 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they lost all the links. And there doesn't seem to be a backup thing. So if you have photographs on Wikimedia, you still have that as a backup. And it's always good to not rely on just one source, let's put it that way. That might not convince everybody to start contributing to Wikimedia and Wikidata, but maybe it'll get you to think about things a little bit. And I think it is very fulfilling, even though it is a lot of work that you don't get any instant gratification for unless you really like seeing data sheets like this. You know, there's probably a little bit of that in me that thinks, oh, that's so nicely presented now. You know, even though it's not an awful lot of information, but we have it now. Yeah, there's probably lots of different motivations to do it. It's probably better than just wasting your time not being productive. In my opinion, I like to be productive. I'm sure not everybody does. So I hope I covered everything, because I don't have a script as usual. My voice is going. Thanks very much for watching. If you have any comments, please put them in the comments. If you meet me in the street, a lot of my people I know personally watch the videos. Give me a comment in person, preferably an encouraging one. Thanks very much for watching, and see you again soon. Slán go fóill.